Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership. Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are actually recording our podcast on a beautiful canal barge here at Little Venice in London called the Boat Pod.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode.
We can't talk about dreams without talking about nightmares. Quite often our most memorable dreams are the ones which have us waking up, gasping for breath, sweating, filled with a sense of horror or dread, with terrifying images still in our heads. If you share a bed with someone, it can be almost as disturbing to wake up to them crying out or thrashing around under the spell of the horrible dream that they're in.
Yes, we get a lot of questions about nightmares. What are they? Are they different from other dreams? And for people who are having them, what can I do about them? To help us answer some of these questions today, we're welcoming on board Dr. Michael Schredl from the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim, Germany. He has been working in the sleep lab of the Central Institute of Mental Health since 1990, and he has published several books and hundreds of papers and articles on topics such as dream recall, dream content analysis, which is a particular specialist subject of his, and obviously nightmares, dreams, and dreams disorders. And he's also editor of the online journal, International Journal of Dream Research. So, Michael, after that, welcome on board the Dreamboat.
Hi.
So we have a lot to ask you about your work on nightmares and nightmare treatment as well. But first, can you tell us how you ended up working in the sleep lab and how your interest in dreams and nightmares began?
Okay. Yes, a long time ago, I liked very much the books of Erich Fromm.
Ah, yes.
I think I read almost every book he wrote. And one of his books was called Dreams, Myths, and Dreams.
Yes.
Or Dreams, Myths, and Fairy Tales or something like that.
That's the one, yeah.
And at that time of my life, I think I was 22 or something, I didn't remember any dream. So I read another book, a more practical book, about how to increase dream recall and what to do with dreams. And since then, it was 1984, I record my dreams regularly. And I was almost from the beginning totally astonished how creative dreams are. And so I got interested in dreams and what can I experience in dreams and what's going on in dreams. And I was lucky to get a job as a student in a sleep lab. And there I am doing dream research for over 30 years.
Oh, very, very impressive. Now, I know that, nightmares is one of the sort of subjects that you do look at. I was interested looking at something that I saw on YouTube that you were talking about. The difference between nightmares and night terrors. A lot of people would probably be sort of surprised that there is a different sort of definition between the two.
Okay. First, a nightmare is defined as a dream with very dysphoric emotions, most often fear or panic, that typically leads to awakening. So the classical falling dream, and you're falling down, and before you touch the ground, you're waking up. Or you're being chased, and just before the perpetrator captures you, you are waking up. So it's more like a storyline which typically ends in awakening. The night terror is a quite different thing because it's firstly occurring at the beginning of the night, typically 1 hour after sleep onset. And the person is not fully awake. It's also called disorder of arousal because the person experiences very intense fear, panic, really intense. But the brain is not fully functional, so you the person can cry loudly, even running around, and did not recognize. He sees where he's going to, or she's going to, but she cannot recognize other people or think about what I'm doing here. It's no one here that threatens me and stuff like that. And the very interesting part is that when the person is someone calms down the person and slowly goes to with him or her back to the bed, the person herself or himself do not remember the episode. And that's especially important in children. The children don't suffer really from night terrors, but the parents really suffer from them because their child is crying and really you can physically measure this. That's a really strong anxiety reaction in the body. The pulse rate can go from 60 to 180 and really strong fear reaction. But it's different because it's not typically only associated with a picture or with an impression, for example, walls falling down or fire in the flat or something like that. And it's not these elaborated stories like in nightmares. So it's a little bit different, and it's a different sleep stage. The night terrors typically occur from slow wave sleep, whereas nightmares are typically part of REM sleep.
So they are a kind of dream in that way, that they're part of REM sleep, but they have different feelings. You have the dysphoric feelings that come up with them. Is that a distinction?
No, not exactly. The nightmares are part of the REM sleep dreaming. If you are very strict, then night terrors are not dreams, because the person who has experienced a night terror attack is not fully asleep and not fully awake. It's some kind of a mixture. And the problem is that the fear reaction is based on this mixture, because the frontal brain, who is downregulating fear and stuff like that, is asleep, whereas the fear center is fully awake. So it's some kind of a mixture state. But the persons who experience night terrors can sometimes report one picture or one scene, but never an elaborated story like in nightmares. So the nightmares are more the imaginative, intense storylines, whereas the night terrors are mainly one picture, walls are crumbling or something like that.
Do you find with people who suffer from night terrors that this one scene or whatever it is becomes repetitive, like you see with nightmares when people say to you, "Oh, I've had the same nightmare I've had since childhood"? Do people say the same thing around night terrors?
That's a question that's very difficult to answer because many of especially children with night terrors, don't remember their night terror attacks. So I've seen some patients, adult patients. Night terrors are quite common in children. About 20% of the children had at least one night terror, whereas in adults it's relatively rare. Less than 1% of the adult population has mostly infrequently night terrors. And as they don't remember all their night terror episodes, it's very difficult to say whether their topics are repetitive. I think there's some topics might be repetitive. I've had a few patients with repetitive themes, but it's difficult to answer the question.
And with nightmares, do you tend to find that somebody does get stuck in the loop of a nightmare and it's the same nightmare that comes back time and time again to haunt them almost?
When you look at nightmare sufferers, especially persons who have frequent nightmares, because nightmares is, just to add this information, is something everyone had once or several times during childhood or adolescence or young adulthood. But we differentiate between these normal nightmares from frequent nightmares, which we define as nightmares occurring once a week or more often. So these are the nightmare sufferers. There's still the discussion about that even 2 to 5% of the adult population belong to this group of frequent nightmare sufferers. So it's quite a large group. And if you look at these persons, then you can find a large variety of topics they dream about. Most of the nightmare sufferers has several different topics, but there are also nightmare sufferers who have one specific dream type that's repeating itself.
I quite liked this bit where you said that there were regular themes when you did a piece of research. Tell us a bit more about the themes that you have found seem to recur most of all.
Yeah, there's typical, we also sometimes say typical dreams or typical dream themes. I already mentioned one is the falling dream, for example. It's one of the most common dreams in Germany, nightmare themes. But also being chased or being paralyzed, death or loss of close people is also a very topic, especially in children and adolescents. We have also the examination dreams, then a big scenario of horror dreams. Not that often, but I already also heard of several of those. So that's a lot of different themes, but I think the main themes are these kind of falling dreams, being paralyzed, being chased.
I think we can all sign up for those. I think we all can probably recall a dream of that somehow, or that can go from dream to nightmare scenario.
Yeah, and very clear primal survival sort of situations that people are facing.
Yeah, in the dream, of course. But of course, many people ask the question, why do we dream about this? Because we're never being chased by a monster or a falling dream. We never experience this in our waking life, because especially in falling dreams, you can only experience this once, and then you cannot talk about it because you're not going to survive this, but we will. I think the idea is that the first question, and I think we will go in that direction, is why we have these dreams and why these specific topics. And there's a lot of interesting things to learn about these specific dream topics.
And how do you answer that question? Why do we have these type of regular recurring sensations in dreams?
Okay. And themes. I think there's two parts to the question. So I start with the first part: is why do we have nightmares at all? Or why have some people more nightmares than others? I think the first thing is important is there is some kind of a disposition, and this disposition was called by an American nightmare researcher. It's called thin boundaries.
Thin boundaries, yeah.
Thin boundaries. It's something persons who are sensitive, creative, imaginative, empathic, and stuff like that. These persons are more prone to nightmares. And the second factor is stress. In our student samples, the more stress the students had, the more nightmares they have. So it's an increasing nightmare frequency. And the third part, when you look at the chronicity of nightmares, then the third part is that most of the people don't go actively confront their nightmares. So it's for many anxiety disorders. For example, if you look at spider phobia, then it's if you tend to avoid everything what has to do with spiders, the anxiety increases. So it's going up. And for most of the persons who have nightmares, they want to get rid of the nightmares. They don't want to have nightmares. So they don't use the optimal approach to deal with nightmares by avoiding them. This is the first part. And the second part, what we also think about is, why do we have specific types of themes of nightmares? It's different whether you have a dream of being chased or falling dream. Why these different nightmares? And the themes, I think, I call this basic pattern. These themes are very revealing what's going on, because if you look, for example, for a dream of being chased, it's something that increases your fear, and instead of confronting the fear, you're running away. And this is called, if in psychological terms, this is called avoidance behavior. So these dreams of being chased are some kind of a dramatized version of avoidance behavior you might have had performed during the day. So, and avoidance is a quite common strategy for most of people in some situations. So it's not astonishing that dreams of being chased are also quite common.
Yeah.
And if you look at another dream example, for example, is the falling dream. And this is a very dramatized version of the fear of helplessness. Because in the falling dream, the only thing you surely know is that you crash to the ground and are dead. But you can do absolutely nothing about it. So it's clear that you don't have any possibility to fly or change the situation. So the falling dream is an intensified version of I don't know what I can do to change the situation, which is quite a common feeling in waking life, but not that intense then in the falling dream.
And we're psychotherapists. We work with people's dreams quite a lot, and we tend to see things in terms of metaphor and symbolism. And it seems like you're talking about, when you talk about dramatization, that leads into that area possibly of metaphor or symbolic action or image within the dreams. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. The problem is that the word symbolic or metaphor is used differently between different persons. Therefore, I prefer to say basic pattern to the dream. Because if you look at symbolic, then you think, okay, this is a blue monster, and why is this monster blue, and why it's a monster and not a dog? And in my view, it's completely unimportant whether it's a monster or a dog or a soldiers, band of soldiers or something like that, because everyone has his own version of dramatization. What is the basic idea is what produces the most anxiety or most fear. And for some people, it's a big dog, and for others, it's a monster, and for others, it's something else. So this is because when you look at symbols, for example, dog. We did the first study looking at the simple fact that dog owners dream more often about dogs than persons who don't have dogs. This is very simple, but never done before. And if you interpret the symbol dog, then you have, for example, to know whether the person has a dog or not. You cannot interpret the dream symbol dog for itself. But in this study, we also found out, which was quite interesting, that persons who had negative experiences with dogs in their childhood or adolescence, for example, being bitten, they still have more negative dog dreams in their adult life. So if you have a negative dog dream or being chased by a dog, for example, that might point, for example, to an experience you had with a dog in waking life. But if you have this kind of a basic pattern, idea behind these nightmares, then you say, okay, this is not about dogs and it's not about the experience I had in my waking life, but the dream picks the dog because it's anxiety provoking.
It carries the energy, for instance.
It's carrying the energy, and the nightmare is not about how can I deal with dogs, but how can I deal with fear on a more general level.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, can you say a little bit about what makes what makes nightmares more or less disruptive for people, and what makes nightmares more or less persistent? You said a little bit about people. If you try to avoid your nightmares, you try not to think about them. That actually doesn't help. It doesn't help your nightmares go away. Are there any other factors that we know of that affect either the intensity and the persistence or the disruption of that dreams bring or nightmares bring?
Okay, I think the one side is more on the etiological side, what causes nightmares, like the disposition or the stress. But many people also forget that nightmares themselves has also negative consequences. So what you can see is that, especially in children, if they have frequent nightmares, that they have fear of falling asleep because they are threatened or don't like the idea that nightmares reoccur. I think I can remember a young woman, a young adult woman, who tried to avoid sleeping for more than several months, but it doesn't work, of course. Wasn't very helpful. And another negative effect of nightmares are that people think, why do I have these horrifying nightmares? So it's, and that's the thing we analyzed also in an empirical study. The attitude toward nightmares. What do I think nightmares mean or what they are about? That can increase stress. If you have a more modern approach, okay, nightmares, I'm a very creative, sensitive person and I've currently some stress, okay, therefore I have nightmares. So this is the most relaxed way to see nightmares. But if you think, oh, the nightmares might point to something in my unconscious, which I didn't know, there's something lurking there, and there's something horrifying. At least there's something people think, oh, I experienced something bad in my childhood, or even even worse is that the person think, okay, nightmares are predictive. I had a young man calling me, and he dreamt that he was shot in a nightmare. And it was a very intense and vivid nightmare, and he developed an anxiety disorder. He was thinking, okay, this when he woke up in the morning, this is my last day. This nightmare becomes true, and I will get shot. So the attitude toward nightmares is a very important thing. And even though there are not many people anymore that think that nightmares are predictive of the future, the other thing that nightmares point to something I don't know, which is some kind of freaky or spooky or something like that. This attitude is quite common and increases the stress the nightmares produce. So as I said, the more modern approach say, okay, I have this disposition, which also have very positive sides, this disposition, and there are a few stressors. I think most of the modern Western people have some stressors in their lives. And if you use these explanations, or also the explanation that nightmares are dramatized versions of topics you deal with in your waking life, the nightmares are less distressing. And I think that's a very important part also of our work to highlight these facts.
Definitely. I think one of the main questions that I get about nightmares is people saying, does it mean I'm going crazy? Does it mean I'm mad if I'm having nightmares? And there's that real fear that people have around it. And therefore also shame that they don't want to talk about it and they don't want to look at it too closely.
Particularly if it's a nightmare that they've had since childhood and they're almost embarrassed that they have not dealt with this subject. And it often takes them a long time to even admit that this has been I use the word because I feel sometimes people who have had lifelong nightmare situations, they almost look haunted. It's something that they as you say, the anxiety carries on into waking life.
Okay. Yeah, and we have a lot of studies and data and other research groups also that people who have frequent nightmares rarely seek professional help. Yeah. And that's a thing we want to change.
Yeah.
I think in our one of the biggest study we did was about 30% or even less of persons who suffered from nightmares or frequent nightmares once a week or more often have sought once in their lifetime professional help. And of those, 30% said it was helpful, the professional help. So it's really a bad also from the medical profession or psychological professions. There's a lot of there's a lot to do for these patients, because first they don't go to someone professional, and if they go, they didn't get the adequate help. So there's a really big gap between those who suffer and those who might help them.
I know that you're running, as part of your research, you've been doing a lot of work with adults, obviously, who want to try and change this and have some very interesting results around that. It seems like a good moment to talk about treatment techniques. Dr. Nigel Hamilton came on in a previous episode and talked briefly about your work with image reversal therapy. And I know Dave has also talked about it in previous episodes. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, but I was interested when I read some of your work that you found that people who are prescribed drugs, particularly some of the diet, something like diazepam and whatnot, some of the more
antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications,
just don't work. And I was quite surprised to hear that.
Yes, if you look at nightmare treatment, then it's very clear, and most sleep societies around the world agree on that it's the most effective way are psychological approaches. Because typical medication like antidepressants or the medications for anxiety disorders don't work on idiopathic nightmares. We can also talk about post-traumatic nightmares. It's a little bit different there. But the typical medication don't work. It's even the other way around. I think there are a lot of antidepressants with, I think, 1 to 5% of the patients reporting more nightmares if they take the antidepressants. That's something to do with the physiology of some antidepressants, because they're increasing the brain activity, which is wanted in in depression. But also, of course, the brain activity during sleep, and especially during REM sleep. And if you have a more active brain and have negative dreams, then you're more likely to have nightmares. So that's a problem, that the normal medication don't work. But you shouldn't forget that if you are depressed and take antidepressants which help your depression, then the nightmares also decrease. But they're not decrease because of the medication directly affect on nightmares, but your depression improves.
And
but if you suffer not from a depression, but mainly from nightmares, then it's currently knowledge is that there are no medication helping with this kind. We like to say idiopathic nightmares. So the nightmares are the main problem the person has. So for this, nobody has any kind of medication that works.
Can you just briefly, for our audience, explain idiopathic?
We try to classify nightmares into two groups, even if it's not always exclusive groups. And we say idiopathic nightmares for the falling dreams and being chased and stuff like that not happens in waking life, typically in the most people's lives, and differentiated this from post-traumatic nightmares. Post-traumatic nightmares or post-traumatic reenactments are typically related to an experience the person had in his or her waking life. Even these post-traumatic reenactments can also occur in waking life. Then they're called flashbacks. So it's some kind of a very specific form. But we did a paper several years ago showing that not all post-traumatic stress disorder patients have post-traumatic nightmares. They have also idiopathic nightmares and post-traumatic nightmares. So it's not a clear-cut differentiation between different patient groups. So the name idiopathic is that it's not related to a real-life experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds absolutely miserable if you do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and you get hit by two forms of nightmare. That sounds horrible.
Yes, but interestingly, the post-traumatic stress disorder people suffer more from the post-traumatic nightmares than from the idiopathic nightmares, because in this case they know, okay, this is some kind of my imagination that's working, and the post-traumatic stress disorder is some kind of a hammer. So do you experience this? This was something you that ruined your life almost. Yeah, you can say that ruined your life. Yeah.
I've first heard about image rehearsal therapy as a form of treatment for post-traumatic nightmare sufferers, but I understand that you now use IRT to work with people who are not necessarily suffering from post-traumatic nightmares only. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm not sure where you heard about the IRT being used on post-traumatic stress disorder first, because the first studies, I think, but I think one of the proponents of this proponents of this treatment approach was Barry Greco from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah. And the first studies he did were with idiopathic nightmare sufferers.
Okay.
But I think it's just a few years later, he also started to use the same approach for post-traumatic stress disorder patients. But one of his major findings, and it's very important if you want to do that as a therapist or yourself, because we think that image rehearsal therapy can be simplified in a way that the person can do it himself or herself alone, but it's not working with post-traumatic stress disorder dreams. So in this case, we really recommend to have a stable psychotherapeutic relationship and use the image rehearsal as an add-on therapy. Whereas if you have idiopathic nightmares, you can use image rehearsal from the get-go and start immediately going. And we did this in several studies, and also Barry Greco did this, and it works very well. Even so, if you use image rehearsal therapy as an add-on for post-traumatic stress disorder, it's also very effective. But in his first study from Barry Greco, many of the participants did not finish the study. So that was the main problem, because it's much more difficult to use this technique for post-traumatic stress disorder dreams and for idiopathic nightmares.
Yeah, how do you change the event? Tell us a bit more about image rehearsal therapy, just with normal nightmares. How do you use it? And if you can, give us some examples of where you've changed the scene.
Okay. The basic idea is that it's a three-step approach. The first is confrontation, that you tell the dream or record the dream, or in children you draw the dream picture, the main dream scene. The second step is you use your waking life imagination to change the scene. Barry Greco said you change the dream in any way you want. I'm not doing a little bit different. Because as a psychologist, I want to have some kind of a self-empowering strategy, not thinking, okay, if this don't happen in the dream, then I would be wonderful. But I'm more, as a psychologist, more thinking, if something bad happened, what can I do to deal with these things in an effective way, and what do I need to cope with these situations? So I'm a little bit more stricter on the change part. And the third step is that is the rehearsal step. And we suggest to work to rehearse one new dream ending for 2 weeks, once a day for 5 to 10 minutes. So this is the three basic steps of the image rehearsal therapy. And as I said, it can be done, do it by yourself. You can use this strategy and work with your nightmares. And of course, it's easier if you have help with other people using this approach, because as we already talked about, nightmare sufferers tend to avoid nightmares.
So give us an example. I think you had a guy who kept dreaming that he was going to crash his car.
Okay. The basic, if you look for examples, we had, I think that's also a very common dream is in our study, which a master student of mine did, was the brakes are not working. It's going downhill and the brakes of the car don't work. So the dreamer, it was a telephone counseling session. The dreamer talked with the master student and thought about, okay, I see a side road, and this side road is going slightly uphill. So I change direction with the car and go, and the brakes are still not working, but the side road is going a little bit uphill, and the car comes to a standstill. So this was her new ending of the dream. It's not going downhill, waking up, but it's going, okay, it's another different route, and it's going uphill, and the car comes to a standstill.
So they visualize that for several days, several times a day?
Okay, the first step is that you're working with a therapist or some on yourself on the new setting, and we try to, or we recommend to write a little paragraph for this new solution, and then you repeat this new solution for 2 weeks, once a day for 5 to 10 minutes, and therefore I think this is important, because I really had several persons in my counseling that reported that they use this approach, but only once. So they have one this dream and work with this dream, and then use the next dream, and this didn't work. So I think you have this kind of that's a rehearsal of the imagery rehearsal therapy. That's a rehearsal part, and I think that's very important. That it's not a one-time thing. So you have to use your imagination and rehearse this. So it's the basic idea of this rehearsing is, of course, that if you do it in your waking life, the dream ego starts to doing also something different. And typically, only one session or one imagination is not enough for these changes in the dream.
Yeah, so the rehearsal part of the image rehearsal therapy is really, really important. And yeah, it's almost sort of persuading the brain to accept a new ending to the story, isn't it?
No, it's one is the brain. As I said, I'm a psychologist. I'm not too much into brain, but it's more the self. It's called self-efficacy. So you are really thinking, okay, if something bad happened, I can do something about it. Yeah, so that's the basic idea what you are learning in image rehearsal. It's not about the specific image, but the basic idea is that if something bad happens, I know what I can do, because I can imagine what I can do. Even if it's some close person is dying, I'm not devastated. I know it's sad, and but I look for help and get some people who are like me and share this event with me, and I do something different.
Yeah, sense of agency that you're giving the client, agency, which is obviously an authority, self-empowerment to change the ending.
That's the main problem, but that's of course the problem in all anxiety disorders, that if you have something where you know that works, then the patient feels better. And that was also a very interesting and unexpected result of our telephone counseling study, that many people the student talked about. It was only a half an hour of a telephone counseling session. That many of them already reported directly after the session that it was helpful to talk with someone who knows about nightmares, who suggested the new treatment strategy or the coping strategy for nightmares, even before anything have changed with the nightmares. Because after the half an hour, there was no decrease in nightmare frequency. That comes later. But already thinking about the new modern thinking about why do people have nightmares, and that something can done about nightmares was very, very helpful for most of the patients who participated in the study.
I was really struck that you had effectiveness after a single 2.5 hour session for some people.
You wouldn't say effectiveness, but the people liked it. So the people had the experience that this is helpful, even if they didn't know it would work, because for the most of them it worked. Not for everyone. I think about 80% where they did profit very well, but there are also some persons who didn't profit. But even have a person who is knowledgeable and knows about nightmares and know about how to cope with them, even this simple fact, which is also, of course, very important for psychotherapy in general, is very helpful, is rated very helpful for the persons. And this is a very stark contrast to what I reported before, that if in the studies we did asking about whether they sought professional help, the nightmare sufferers, or not, they often don't have any positive experience from this professional help they sought before.
Well, I'm sure it must be really satisfying to know that there is treatment coming out of this where there was nothing before. It's coming out of your research, which, I mean, it doesn't always happen when we're looking into psychological effects, where sometimes we discover where things are coming from or why, but we don't always come up with something that we can do to help people in the day-to-day.
That's good. It's of course not my research, because the main proponent was Barry Krakow of Albuquerque,
Sure.
Mexico.
Yeah.
But we tried to use his method, and even simplify it a little bit, and use it very effectively with patients. Yeah, that's of course very satisfying. Especially I'm doing also a nightmare research, nightmare counseling for adult nightmare sufferers. So it's very, very helpful to see. Very nice to see that people really confront their nightmares and have a very different approach to them after one session.
Yeah, I'm sure that's very satisfying. Well, we're running out of time, so we'll maybe move on to our dream of the week, where we talk about a dream that somebody has sent in to us. And we do have a dream that fits the description of a nightmare. So if it's all right, we'll move on to that. And I'll just start by reading out the nightmare, and then we can just discuss it together. So here's the nightmare. It says, I'm in a small plane, sitting behind the pilot with one other passenger. We are flying over a rural landscape. And suddenly the pilot says, "What the hell?" And we run into a vertical wall of solid water, plunging straight into the side of it. And suddenly it is as if we are deep in a lake or ocean. We are all hoping to rise to the surface in the plane, which is undamaged, and we start to float upwards, but not very fast. Then, as we rise, it turns out that we are actually in ice. The pressure of it starts to buckle the roof of the plane, and we all pound on the doors trying to get out. I woke up feeling the rising panic, and I was relieved that waking up was my escape. So that's the end of the dream. And the dreamers provided a little bit of background as well, saying, I've just been going through a busy period and having to adjust plans due to changing circumstances at home and at work. And I had been up late preparing for a piece of public engagement and maybe putting some pressure on myself to get ready. I didn't think I was unusually stressed, though.
That's a really interesting dream. I know I can feel myself wandering already into other dream interpretation techniques. But in terms of what we're talking about today, if we hand back to you, Michael, how would you then work with this particular client if they came to see you and this had been a regular nightmare? What would you suggest they would do?
Okay. The basic idea is, of course, that the image rehearsal therapy is asking the question, how can you change the dream?
Yeah.
So there are several topics. I think we can also speculate about some forms of basic patterns, because there are some interesting basic patterns in this dream. But the first thing you would ask the dreamer, go back into the dream. Imagine you're back in the dream situation. You are in this plane. It's water and ice. The roof is cracking, or even something going bad going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, what would you like to do? What are possible solutions to these situations? So you don't look what the dream is, how it's related to any Viking life issues, stress, or something like that. So just if you are in this dream scenario, like you can use the analogy of a film, a movie. Mm-hmm. If you are the movie director and you have this kind of, I think it's a very common scene of action
is.
movies, and then you say, how could this go? As also in many action movies, especially if the hero is involved, then there's some magical solution to this, even the worst scenarios. And this is the idea that the person thinks the dream or thinks about how the dream can go on. Because it was very nice in this small in the telling the dream that the dreamer is using the most ultimate avoiding strategy, namely waking up. Waking
Yes,
up
exactly.
is the total avoidance. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to have to do anything with these bad situations. I wake up and this was just a dream.
And actually, yes, they say
that's the
very
basic idea of
specifically.
the IIT is go against this and say, okay, if I'm in a bad situation, especially if it's very imaginative bad situations, then I use my imagination to guide the dream in a different direction.
Okay.
I was thinking if they were here now, they'd probably use a canal boat that is going past us and you can possibly hear, as they could change the dream and hop on a canal boat and float off.
Yeah.
But,
when I work with clients, I try not to give any suggestions.
Okay.
Because it's
It's not their
said
dream, then,
earlier,
it's-
it's all about empowerment. So
Yeah.
it's the basic idea. It's much more helpful if the patient or the person with the nightmares has this idea themselves or himself or herself. Then because in working with children, there are a lot of books say, put the tiger into a cage or something like that.
Yeah.
We don't do that any of those because the children have much more imaginative
Exactly.
solutions than the parents.
and you destroy autonomy at that moment.
Yeah, but it's also, you can argue that it's guidance if it's very, very, very anxious child, that you say, okay, there are some solutions, but my experience, it's worth to wait a little bit before the person comes up with a solution.
Yeah.
So as a psychologist, would you then just be encouraging them to come up with their own solution? Staying with it.
And
saying,
if they try, for example, there's a monster behind me, and I try to find hide myself, then I say, is there another way you can do this? Because hiding is not a very active strategy.
Okay.
So in my opinion, it should something where you have this feeling of empowerment. So I have a few helpers behind me, and I confront this monster that's chasing me and stuff like that.
I'm quite tempted to ask Dave, so if it was your dream, Dave, how would you change that dream? What would you do?
I mean, it does sound like a pretty tight situation, doesn't it? And
at least it needs some imagination to solve it. Yes, that's right.
It does, yeah. And I have to say, if it was my dream, and putting it in Montague Ullman's language, I feel like something to melt that ice. Something, like I'm picturing a laser beam or something like that. Maybe because you were talking about action movies, Michael.
Okay, yeah. But these kind of solutions are very different. If you look at the basic pattern of this nightmare, then of course the one thing is that you are passive because you are in a plane that is fly by a pilot.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting basic pattern, because it's also, if you're driving a car or sitting in the car or the bus or the plane, it's different. You're not that active in the dream. And of course, this kind of, I think the American dreams researcher had these typical tidal wave dreams.
Yes.
And it's a little bit similar. So you're totally overwhelmed with everything. So it's some kind of the feeling of being overwhelmed by everything. And if you try to do something and there's everything goes wrong, everything that can go wrong goes wrong.
Yeah.
And this is the as I said before, this is the dramatized version of fears that are mainly, and as the dreamer told, that he's doing a lot of different things in his waking life and changing a few aspects of his waking life. These fears are typical. It's normal to have some kind of fear. Does this work out or not? And the dream is dramatizing this in a very intensive way. And as you said, it's quite interesting that you, for this dream you need a lot of imagination to get out of it. But that might be also something that is important for waking life.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you've really touched on what they've said in the background, that I've had to adjust plans due to changing circumstances at home and work. So that sense of something happening to them that they have to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Adjusting means that I don't do things myself, but I have to react. But I think it's very important that these kind of feelings that shows up in these dramatized versions are normal for waking life. So it's nothing bad to have these nightmares, except of course, waking up from them. But if you have this kind of idea that it's typical and normal feelings that in new life situations or in changing life circumstances, that these fears show up, it's much more relaxing to work with it.
Yeah.
To accept it.
Exactly.
Did you have any final thoughts on that dream?
Well, I was just also wondering, contemplating Michael's earlier moment about how falling dreams are about helplessness, which is what we've just been saying, but how the brain or the mind wonderfully makes that quite sophisticated. So here the falling is actually not in their control, it's in a plane. And again, as you say, touches into some of those more archetypal images that we often absorb now through film of, events like planes falling out of the sky and things. It touches into that, as you say, Michael, that deeper chord of helplessness, and how that can surface through different imagery that is pertinent. Hence Freud's work on associations. And as you say earlier on, everyone's got different associations. So what's the core energy that might sit behind the varying associations? I think is a really interesting way into dream interpretation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Michael. We really appreciate it. And perhaps we can have you back another time to talk about some of the many other aspects to your work that we've just touched on today.
Have nice dreams, and even if it's a nightmare, then you know what to do.
Yes, we'll give you a call. Good luck with all your research, Michael. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
So that was Michael Schredl from Mannheim with a really different and interesting take on nightmares, which I think you could probably apply and would obviously help children as well as adults. Anyway, I'm hoping and saying to you, sweet dreams instead of sweet nightmares, sweet dreams.
And keep dreaming, not having nightmares, and keep sharing your dreams.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.